But then in the 50s and 60s, this like processed food and trying to make things easier for mom because moms wanted to go to work or whatever it was. I mean, it was such a huge shift in the way food was prepared. I mean, I grew up with really crappy food. And, like what was cheese? It was American cheese slices wrapped in plastic, which I don't, I think they call it cheese food in quotations. I'm not even sure it was cheese.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. I wanted to speak with my guest today because she's an Ayurvedic colleague of mine who does such a great job explaining Ayurveda to beginners. It's really difficult to explain Ayurveda in a simple way without turning it into some kind of personality test you might find in a fashion magazine or an HR workshop, because Ayurveda is actually a deep medical science bridging mind, body, and emotions. Hailing from India, it's thousands of years old, still practiced in India, and has spread all over the globe. It's been practiced in more recent decades in the US, Europe, Australia, all over. And it's a little tricky because most of these places already had conventional medical systems established by the time Ayurveda rolled in. So even though Ayurveda is old and wise, it hasn't quite found its way into the US yet. Vogue and Mind Body Green both have named Ayurveda a top wellness trend in recent years, and yet people still really don't know what Ayurveda is. They think it's perhaps drinking golden milk or giving yourself an oil massage when you have anxiety. Others know it for an elaborate form of cleansing that Ayurvedic practitioners do with people called Panchakarma. But like many Americans, including myself, my guest today found Ayurveda when she was way into adulthood. She had struggled with eating battles for most of her life, coincidentally, much like one of her high school mentors, Oprah Winfrey. In Ayurveda, she found a healing practice that allowed her to grab the reins on her own health, and it was influential enough for her to switch careers and start helping other people do the same thing. If you are a beginner to Ayurveda, my guest's work will help you understand the basics of this vast science. She'll open up a doorway into Ayurveda for you, and when you walk through this doorway, as more and more people have, you'll begin to recapture the truth of who you are. So today I'm here with Susan Weis-Bohlen. She's an author and an Ayurvedic practitioner. So for over 12 years, Susan has been a full-time Ayurvedic consultant, a cooking teacher, a meditation teacher, and a leader of sacred site tours. Her personal journey into the Ayurvedic lifestyle began when she came across an Ayurvedic cleansing technique called Panchakarma. And so what began as the release of damaging toxins and personal difficulties eventually grew into an impassioned vocation. She has since studied with the best teachers of Ayurveda, both in the US and in India. And in 2004, she opened Breathe Books, which was a metaphysical bookstore in Baltimore. And in 2012, she added an Ayurvedic vegetarian cafe. In 2008, Susan received her first certification in Ayurveda from the Chopra Center in California. I think a lot of people probably don't know that Deepak's center was Ayurvedic.
That's right.
Yep. In subsequent years, she studied with Dr. Vasant Lad in New Mexico in India. In addition, Susan is certified in Ayurvedic cooking from Amadea Morningstar. She's the author of the world-renowned Ayurvedic cookbook and Ayurvedic Cooking for Westerners. So after 10 years of running the business, Susan decided in 2014 to close that shop and the cafe and concentrate fully on her Ayurvedic practice. So she's now a full-time Ayurvedic consultant, meditation teacher, Ayurvedic cooking teacher, and a speaker, in addition to being an author. So before COVID-19, Susan led a weekly meditation group. She used to take people on trips to experience Ayurveda and tour sacred sites in India. And in February 2018, she published her first book, which became an instant Amazon bestseller, The Ayurveda Beginner's Guide: Essential Ayurvedic Principles and Practices to Balance and Heal Naturally. Her next book, which is Seasonal Self-Care Rituals: Eat, Breathe, Move, and Sleep Better According to Your Dosha, will be published by Simon & Schuster. It's going to be released on December 29th of 2020. Susan lives with her husband Larry and their 3 dogs, Ella, Shadow, and Junie. Junie is a rescue from Pune, India, and she lives in the woods in Reisterstown, Maryland, just outside of Baltimore City. Thank you so much for joining us today, Susan.
Thank you, Heather. And when you were doing your introduction, when you mentioned the gut, I've been doing so much research and writing about the gut microbiome and even the skin microbiome. And this sort of like new science of the microbiome is like old Ayurvedic science. We just didn't call it the microbiome. So I just love seeing how science and everything sort of comes around. 5,000 years ago, Ayurveda and Chinese medicine were talking about this. And also, I should say, like intermittent fasting. We didn't call it that, but you took a break between meals. Like all of these things are now in the public lingo and everybody's talking about it. And so I love that. So that's bringing more and more people to Ayurveda, and then they can understand when we talk about the seasonality of eating and the importance of your lifestyle changes and rituals during different seasons, how it relates to your microbiome. So people can come to Ayurveda now from so many different walks of life and scientific and so on, and they can find something in it to grab a hold of. So I love that you mentioned that.
Mm. Yeah. And so you wrote the Ayurveda Beginner's Guide, and I know that it's difficult to explain Ayurveda to people sometimes. So, how do you explain it? Because you've got this beginner audience here. Let's
Mhm.
assume that some of the people listening to this podcast do not know what Ayurveda is. How would you explain it to an absolute beginner?
So I have what I used to call my elevator speech, but now that we can't stand in elevators with people, I have to come up with a new way of giving it a moniker. But the basic, elevator speech of Ayurveda, I like to say it's like Chinese medicine, but from India, because Chinese medicine is sort of like leaps and bounds ahead of the understanding of Ayurveda in the US. There's so many people familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, herbs, acupuncture, the different kind of lingo, meridians, and so on used in Chinese medicine. And that came up around the same time as Ayurveda 5,000 years ago. And so Ayurveda is just like that, very, very similar to that, except it uses herbs and spices and plants and the things that were available in India at the time and in the language of Sanskrit. So, you get that, and people look at you and they're like, oh, I kind of know a little bit about Chinese medicine. So I get it. I get it. It's about food and so on. And then I might go a little bit more into explaining that Ayurveda is very individualized to the person's mind body constitution. And more people have heard the word dosha, Dosha, which actually means like fault or error. When things go out of balance, your doshas go out of whack. But we like to talk about people having 3 mind body constitutions. And this is something people really get. When you say, oh, some people are more airy and spacey and ungrounded and forgetful and easily distracted. Then sometimes they're kind of skinny, forget to eat. And then you have the kind of person who's really hot under the collar, really sometimes aggressive, impatient. They tend to get headaches or have rosacea. And then you say, and there's another kind of person who's really grounded, smooth, steady, calm, everybody's best friend, maybe a little bit heavier, but they're really easygoing and kind. And then they see themselves even in that tiny little description. They go, oh my God, I'm so distracted. I start like 10 different art projects and I never finish them. And it's pretty clear that they might be what we call vata dosha, which is air and space. Or the person says, yeah, I get really angry and frustrated at politics, and I try to tell everybody the way to think, but it's really difficult sometimes, and they get in fights with people. And I like to say they're the ones drinking like an iced frappuccino in the middle of winter in shorts and a t-shirt. They're what we call pitta dosha, and they're made of fire and water. And then some people like really see themselves in that easygoing, laid back kind of person, never really feels hungry, but eats breakfast because it's 8 o'clock, eats lunch because it's noon, eats dinner at 6. And they're made of earth and water, and that dosha is called kapha. So even those little tiny attributes, people can just see themselves in that. And they love that. And their eyes light up and they're like, oh, that's me, or that's my mom, or that's my husband. So they really start to get a feel like, what is this? And what am I supposed to do to work with that? Like, if I am really distracted and I forget to eat, how can you help me? And so for all of the doshas, when they're out of balance, Ayurveda has an answer. And the answer sometimes, you can just be really simple and say, okay, well, just try these foods. And then we can get more in depth if the person is interested in that. And going into like meditation, breath work, lifestyle changes, exercise, even the colors they wear, gemstones, Vastu Shastra, which is Indian feng shui, or Jyotish, which is Indian astrology. So it goes as deep as a person really wants to go. But if we just start out with like really small changes in lifestyle and food, we can really start to make a difference. And that is the Ayurveda beginner's guide premise. It's telling you how
I
to make
see.
those small changes, which lead to huge lifestyle benefits for the person.
Mm. Now, it sounds like that when you first got exposed to Ayurveda, it wasn't a small change because Panchakarma is not a small change. But had you experienced Ayurveda in small doses before you did Panchakarma?
No. I tell people, like, do not do what I did because for some no magical reason it's stuck. But I tell people to get a little bit of education about it first, learn a little bit about the basics. Well, I had read Deepak Chopra for sure, starting in the early 90s, but I didn't quite grasp what Ayurveda was. It was more really metaphysical, very cool Vedic stuff I was reading from Deepak. But then I did read a book by Dr. David Frawley. Might have been The Yoga of Herbs or Mind. He has so many wonderful books. And I think there I started to really see myself as kapha dosha. So I did know a little bit. I knew that I had excess kapha, which in my case was excess weight. And I learned through a friend that you could have this treatment called Panchakarma, and it can help you get rid of excess kapha
Mm-hmm.
weight. And so I just dove right in and I called the Chopra Center. I know exactly when it was. It was like August 7th, 2007. It was a Saturday. It was somewhere around there. And the program coordinator, her name is Gabrielle Forleo, is she still there, who answered the phone. I said, I think I need to have Panchakarma, or I need to have some sort of help. And she told me about a program they had at the Chopra Center called Perfect Health. And I signed up for 10 days starting August 31st, 2007. And I went and I totally fell in love with the whole process. Of course, it's a lot of body work you get when you have Panchakarma, which is a lot massages, sound massage, powders that they rub on your body, like all sorts of like ultimate spa stuff. But it also included enemas, herbalized enemas that they actually administered. And then you would expel waste, which I learned was called ama. Ama is like literally undigested food. So you're like expelling that from your body. And I learned, took a course during that time in this program called Perfect Health, which was about Ayurveda. So I fell completely in love with it and it changed my life, obviously. I remember so many different things happened, but I came home from California. I flew all the way across the country from Baltimore for this. And I came home and I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? And I had an Ayurvedic section in my bookstore, which had Amadea Morning Star's Ayurvedic cookbook and Ayurvedic cooking for Westerners on the shelf. So I took those home and I made my first khichdi, which is an Ayurvedic mainstay of split yellow mung beans, basmati rice, spices, ghee, and different vegetables. And I made that and I took one bite of it and my whole body went, mm. It was like every cell in my body said, yes, this is food. This is what you need to eat. And this is how you feel completely satisfied. I think I was feeling very dissatisfied in many areas of my life. and eating the wrong food to try and satisfy it, when this whole food was the most satisfying thing. And I very quickly lost 30 pounds. I ultimately lost 60 pounds, but I also lost 80 points on my cholesterol really
Mm.
rapidly, from 240 to 160. My weight went from 220 to whatever that is, minus 60. And it just stayed. And I just fell in love with this way of living. It was the easiest thing I'd ever done. And I had never lost weight where it stayed off. And then every single aspect of my life changed. Everything, relationships, my business, how open my heart was, how I learned to receive from other people. And there is no place in my life that was untouched by Ayurveda. So that's why I'm such a zealot.
Mm.
That's a long story, but
Yeah, and I want to try to get into it as much as we can in the time that I have you. And, I have the luxury of Susan and I get to work on a lot of projects together because we both are on the board of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association and we work on some committees together. So we get to talk all the time, but we really don't have a lot of time to speak about our lives that much because we're always getting busy and down to work on things. So, Susan, you mentioned that you had this big transformation with Ayurveda and you've been with this practice of Ayurveda, both for yourself and also helping others with this practice for a long time now. And so you've gone through some changes and stages in life, right? Because you
oh yeah.
mentioned, yeah. So tell me a little bit about how it's helped you in the different stages of your life.
Well, it's interesting. I think probably the first major stage of life that changed while I was practicing Ayurveda was I met my husband. And so I went from being a one person Ayurveda factory to a two-person. And Ayurveda, though, totally made me ready to be married. I met my husband when I was 45 years old and got married at 47. And we're married now nearly 11 years. So I saw how Ayurveda changed me emotionally and sort of prepared me like to meet the love of my life, if I can say that. It's true. And so I saw the layers. There's a term in Sanskrit, kosha, Kosha. So we have koshas that are like these sheaths that cover us emotionally, physically, energetically, and so on. So I saw how you can break down the barriers of the koshas where you need to and allow in different experiences, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and you recognize them as real. So many things out there in the world, like we have fears and anxieties and things that stop us in our tracks, and they aren't real. It's just stuff that we're making up in our heads. And then let's say like you're invited to a party and you get really nervous about going by yourself and you just sort of psych yourself out about it and you get all nervous and anxious, but then you get to the party and everything is fine and you have a really good time. And so that whole thing that you put your body through in the beginning, you sort of like wreaked havoc on yourself by getting yourself so anxious and worked up when it was fine. Ayurveda taught me, working with the koshas, how to be discerning in what to let in and what is real and what is not. And so when I met my husband, I literally saw him real. Like he was so real. He was it. And I don't think, at the age of 45, I had a lot of experience. And if it wasn't for Ayurveda, I don't think I would have been able to pinpoint the areas in my mind and body that were recognizing that this person was my person. So Ayurveda readied me for that. And then the next stage of our Ayurveda helped me out infinitely is menopause. When I was 52, I went into menopause. And Ayurveda, there's a wonderful book. I think it's called Women's Hormones. I'm not sure, by Claudia Welch, Welch. And Claudia's book was like my Bible during menopause and learning to really hone in on my Ayurvedic skills to see what foods and lifestyle things really triggered me in menopause. I had my hot flashes were significant, but they weren't like drenching. But I think I had more like emotional hot flashes where it was really hard for me to keep my emotions in check, hard for me to keep my meditation regular. But I learned about different pranayama, breath work, things I could do, and foods to avoid and foods to add in, estrogenic foods to add into my diet to help me out. So that really, and the different herbs to use, shatavari and ashwagandha and so on, different things to do to help sort of smooth out menopause as much as you can. It's going to happen anyway, but I think the Ayurvedic practices I had helped me to have a smooth transition through that. And now at 57, this has just become a part of my go-to everyday regime. Now, as we are taping this podcast, we're in a pandemic. We're in the COVID-19 pandemic. And Ayurveda again has given me lots of answers, as well as more, I would say, like Western pharmacopoeia, I guess, things like vitamin D, zinc, vitamin C, quercetin, but also the Ayurvedic herbs and remedies, things like Chyavanprash, things to take to boost your immune system. So because of COVID, we're just looking at to try to eat the best foods we can, the freshest foods, of course, but also different practices, rituals, and supplements we can take to help support the immune system, hopefully, so we don't get sick. And if we do get sick, that we heal faster. One of the greatest medicines of all, I think, is pranayama, is breath work. And so I'm so happy that I have that in my back pocket because this particular pandemic, COVID, attacks the lungs. And I'm just grateful every day for my pranayama practice because I feel that my lungs are strong and hopefully can withstand anything that comes its way. So I think those are the major, I think, stages of my life so far where Ayurveda has played such a huge role. And now going into my late 50s and early 60s and seeing sort of different body changes, maybe kind of like arthritis, a little bit more aches and pains, slower to move, sleep patterns changing. Ayurveda seems to have an answer for everything. And it's just following the path there to help me feel better. And then, of course, I use all this wisdom for my clients. So I can just pass on everything that I've learned through the different stages in life and see how it can help others.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because it does seem that people are more drawn to Ayurveda when they're going through some sort of transition, whether it's
Hmm.
they went through a breakup or they are thinking about going through a breakup or they might want to have a baby or they're in the postpartum period or they want to get off the pill. I mean, obviously these are female examples. Many of them are female examples, but there are these transitional moments in our lives where it's like what we were doing in one situation, one set and setting was fine. But then as the set and setting changes, like in the seasons, for example, and I know your next book is being published on the seasonal considerations. So it's like what we've done in the past doesn't necessarily work in this new set and setting, and we have to adjust. And it's really interesting because why don't we just do it? Like, why can't we just, as people, why can't we just, perceive that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do right now? And it's this weird thing. And it almost feels like Ayurveda grew along with civilization. Like the more sort of civilized and intelligent and the more memorized knowledge we got and all this stuff, the more Ayurveda was needed, because it's when we started to become so dominated by our conditioning that we just forgot to see what was right in front of us and what was required of us in the moment.
Yeah, well, I think this just as in my lifetime in the 60s and 70s, how much food changed. I think before that, even I guess going back to the early 50s and before that, everything was farm to table. It wasn't like you went to a fancy restaurant for farm to table. Everything you ate was farm to table. But then in the 50s and 60s, this like processed food and trying to make things easier for mom because moms wanted to go to work or whatever it was. I mean, it was such a huge shift in the way food was prepared. I mean, I grew up with really crappy food. And, like what was cheese? It was American cheese slices wrapped in plastic, which I don't, I think they call it cheese food in quotations. I'm not even sure it was cheese. And I don't know, just our parents learned different things. Like my mom put sugar. I love my mom, and she's alive and well at almost 86. But she put sugar on everything. Sugar on strawberries, sugar on cantaloupe, sugar on blueberries. I mean, I'm shocked that we don't have diabetes, but we didn't learn to eat well when we were younger. And so it is really hard to make choices. And, it is like, what is with us? Well, we're just like human. So now, like when we crave comfort food, like in India, Khichdi is comfort food. You hardly find it on a restaurant menu, and they look at you like, yeah, that's what my mother made me when I was sick, you know? But so khichdi, though, is something if we remember, and I have an urge for something, comforting to make some version of khichdi. But we have this sort of like implanted in our genes, like ice cream or grilled cheese or pretzels or I don't know, Fritos or whatever it was, Oreo cookies, God forbid, the stuff you ate when you were younger. It's still imprinted in there as that is my safe food. So it really does make a concerted effort to make a big shift. And even though we know it's right for us, we know we need to exercise, we need to meditate and all that. Sometimes the simplest things is just hard because we have a conditioning from when we're younger to go another way. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that easy. But I think we just really need to be forgiving with ourselves and to ourselves.
Yeah, and it definitely seems to happen at a cultural level. The examples that you gave in terms of how the diets have changed in America and what was normal, and, even the health recommendations that come from the American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, these organizations, or the CDC, they also change. There's all these jokes about, I did what the doctor told me, I ate the cream. I ate the
Right.
butter, I drank the cream, and I still had a coronary, being a
Right.
joke. That things do seem to change, and it's because of this contextual thing. And it's kind of interesting if you were to think about building a country. Obviously the Native Americans were here before the Europeans got here and the other settlers, but to build the infrastructure of a country and build buildings and towns and cities and things like that, it makes sense that you would need a lot of calories to be able to do that. People would be working hard and burning, and there'd be a lot to do that. Just like when we're little children, our bodies need to build and we need, more calories. Like my kid, if I ate what my kid ate
Hmm.
every day, I'd probably put on a bunch of weight. I always tell him, I'm like, you're building and mommy's not trying to build. So that's why
Hmm.
I'm not eating that. But it's interesting because we really have shifted it culturally because of almost like how the stage of life that the United States is in, or the stage of life that many of the developing countries or many of the countries on the planet are in, that a lot of the infrastructure that we do need has already been built. And so it's like everybody needs to go into a new mode now. And I think we can all relate to that even on an individual level, depending on where you are in your own stage of life. Certain stages of life you have to work really hard. Certain stages of life you don't have to work as hard, and there's a different requirement in
Hmm.
each of those situations. So going back to seasons and seasonality, because I know that's what your next book is about, and I'm really excited to read that one. Can you tell us a little bit about what do the seasonal changes, how does that affect health from an Ayurvedic perspective, and what can people do to manage their health as the seasons change?
So, one of the tenets of Ayurveda is we say that sort of like we're in the greatest danger of disease at the junction of the seasons. So, in between summer and fall and winter and spring is when the body is really the weakest going into the next season. And so my book really looks at that juncture between the seasons and what you need to do all season long to prepare yourself for that shift in season. So it's written with pretty much the Americas and I guess Europe, our seasons, but you can adjust it to wherever you live. But we say in Ayurveda we have three seasons, and it's sort of like late fall, early winter, and then you have winter, spring, late winter, spring, and then summer. And so those are correlated to the doshas. So vata is the late fall, early winter, kapha is late winter, spring, and pitta is summer. And so when we're feeling pretty healthy and feeling balanced, we can simply eat with the seasons. So that means as we go into, we're in summertime right now here in the US, and it's like 99 degrees and humid here in Baltimore. And so what naturally would you do in this type of weather? Would you eat heavy stews, root vegetables, or would you eat like lightly cooked foods, raw foods, coconut water, sweet, juicy fruits? Like what sounds better to you? So, like if you're in tune with yourself, it's the cooling, hydrating foods that are going to be healthier for you in this season. We don't do a lot of raw food in Ayurveda, but in weather like this, you actually can do more salads and lighter foods with the right spices and oils to help you digest it. Let's say we're moving through summer, and at the end of summer, we've accumulated a lot of this sort of like raw food and lighter food, but we're moving into a drier season of fall. And so we need to prepare the body for that through different things like types of abhyanga or skin massage, nasya oil, oiling that we do in the ears, oiling that we do in the mouth, sort of starting to oleate the system more to get ready for the dry season. And that extra oleation also helps us get rid of ama, which I mentioned earlier. Ama is pockets of undigested food that sort of get stored in the body and stored up for a rainy day if you're eating too much food. And so we need to scrape that out before we go into the fall season so that we can start fresh. So this extra oil that we eat actually helps to get that moving, move it out of the body.
Mm.
And so then in the fall season, it's vata season when things dry up, the leaves start to dry and it's changeable. Some days are hot, some days are cold. It's all the attributes of vata dosha. And so we need to have those warmer, more grounding foods so we don't sort of fly away. We look at the vegetables that are available then and we start to have more of the, let's say, the sweet potatoes or the root vegetables, beets, and so on are becoming more readily available if you shop seasonally. Before I go on to the rest of the season, so I just want to say that our supermarkets and grocery stores these days have everything all year long. They truck it in from everywhere around the world. So it can be really hard to be discerning about what is a food for your season, which is where my book and a lot of other Ayurveda books, and especially John Douillard's The Three Season Diet, such a great book from, I don't know, almost 20 years ago, maybe. And the Banyan Botanicals website, they all have seasonal food guidelines to help you make a better decision. So just because beets and salsa are available in summer doesn't mean you should eat it. Like, salsa is really heating and summer is hot. So you don't want to do that. You want to do the opposite. But looking at the grocery list can help you, or if you're lucky to have a farmer's market near you, you can see what is locally available at that time. So that's really important to
Hmm.
figure out what is your season where you are.
If you want to create a more receptive body, free from toxins, inflammation, and metabolic issues, either for yourself or because you're considering trying to get pregnant, would it be crazy for you to explore booking a virtual Ayurvedic consultation with me? There's probably never been a more perfect time to do it. Every day you wait matters. So if you're ready to get your body back in balance, I'll give you a 30-day plan to get you started. Go to heathergrish.com to book a consultation. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Yeah, and I think you still have to cover kapha,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a question about cravings
Mm-hmm.
because, we've talked, I don't really like to cook that much.
I know.
I like to eat. I just am not a huge fan of cooking. I'd rather live with somebody who likes to cook and then do the dishes.
Uh-huh.
But so I'm not, a huge foodie and I don't have a lot of skill in the kitchen and things like that. But I do a lot of fasting with my clients, I would say. Maybe that kind of goes along with my desire for liking cleaning more
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
cooking. And, just this idea of cravings seems to come up a lot with the people that I work with. And I think a lot of people have a difficult time understanding that, like, what is a good craving and what is a bad craving. And I kind of have my own way to have understood it in my own body, but I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. If you could tell people, like,
Yeah.
how do they tell the difference between a good craving and a bad craving?
So, what I would call it is a physical craving and an emotional craving. There's a whole section in my book, Ayurveda Beginner's Guide, which I sort of riffed off of Amadea Morningstar's, which she allowed me to from her Ayurveda cookbook. We talk about in Ayurveda that we want to have six tastes in our food, and the tastes are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. So when we have cravings, we're craving one of those. It's usually sweet. Sweet's the number one thing people crave. I learned that we crave sweet the most because that was the first taste we ever had was mother's milk, which is sweet. And so that's the first thing we go to when we're feeling really out of balance, upset, emotional, is we go to craving sweet. And the second craving that people go for is salty. So you can say, like, oh, you're an ice cream person, or you're a chips person, or olives, or cookies, or whatever it might be to satisfy you. But what I do is I tell my clients and I ask myself, what am I craving this emotionally, or am I craving it physically? So let's just stick with sweet for a minute. If I'm having like a really intense sweet craving, I can say, am I getting enough sweetness in my life? Am I getting enough hugs? Am I giving enough hugs? Am I being kind to people? Am I allowing people to be kind to me? So you see what I mean? So you really have to look in and see what it is this a true physical need that you have, or is it an emotional need? In Sanskrit, there's a word rasa, R-A-S-A, and rasa has many meanings, but the two meanings here I want to talk about is taste and emotion. So actually, in Ayurveda, we say there's no distinction between emotional eating and eating because you physically want something. It's all connected to your emotions. There's no non-emotional eating. But so we want to look at that though and say, if I'm having a sweet craving and I look into the emotions of it and I think, yeah, I'm taking care of myself, and maybe right now I just can't get it out of my mind. So I might then look to the healthier way of solving that craving, perhaps having tea with honey or something like that, and see if that solves the craving. But at the same time, just to be really aware that it's probably emotional as well. I don't like to call them like bad cravings because they come from somewhere. And we have these desires that we have a lot of things, I guess, from childhood or adulthood or whatever that are unfulfilled. And so we look to fill it often with food or shopping or sex or other compulsions that we might have to fill that void. Like, so right now during this pandemic, like if something comes up, I can't just like run out of the house and try and buy something to deal with the lack of something that I'm feeling. I need to sit down. I need to search. So, is it a feeling? Am I sad? What do I need? Did I eat a good breakfast? Have I had enough today? Or whatever it is. That I talk to my husband? Is there something I need to explore? And this pandemic and this sort of lockdown that we're all in is giving us really a gift to sit down and focus on ourselves and see what we need. Because sometimes when we have a craving, it's so overwhelming, we can't even pinpoint it. We have no idea. It's just like, oh, I got to go get, like, I remember back in the day, I mean, I was like a mess. I was like bulimic. I was all sorts of crazy shit. Sorry. I was everything. Like, I had to go out and get like Snickers bars or some fast food drive-in thing, like I had to stuff myself because I did not want to think about anything. So those cravings were completely irrational. It had nothing to do with reality. It had to do with a whole bunch of other things that I've explored and I'm much better from now. But you can't really do that right now anyway. So if somebody does have an eating disorder or major cravings that just sort of take over their mind and they can't focus, now is this gift to sit back and say, whoa, I can't go out and satisfy this. Let me sit back and think for a minute, what's going on with me? If I can go
Yeah.
back to the taste, I'll just say the
Yeah.
sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, astringent. Ayurveda teaches us that if we have all six tastes in every meal, that we're really satisfied. And that's why khichdi is so satisfying. It does have all six tastes. So we really want to make sure our food has those six tastes in it, but also look at the emotional component.
Mm. And I know I cut you off on kapha season, so we definitely need to go back to that. And I'm really happy that you mentioned, what's happening right now. Oftentimes, when I think about the grasping mechanisms that we have that come up with any craving or any addiction that we have, like you mentioned, they come in so many different forms, from food, like so many, social media, sex, exercise could be, so many different things that we grasp for. I will sometimes envision like a hand grasping in my brain. Like I have a hand in my brain
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
trying to grasp for something.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way that you explain that, because what we're witnessing with people right now is more than just the fear of getting, sick with the coronavirus. There is a lot of other stuff coming up for people. I think all of us who work in the health space, whether, we definitely were not considered, mental health care practitioners, for example, but we are dealing with the mind in all of our practices as Ayurvedic practitioners. So we are certainly seeing what's happening with people on multiple levels. Even if someone's coming to us with a digestive issue or a sleep issue or something that seems sort of physical in nature, there's certainly a mental component to that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
And I want to go back to poor Kafa. We just slipped right over her. And maybe it's because at the time of this interview, it's really hot and I'm in LA and I'm just like not thinking about kapha, and I probably need more of that. So tell us about kapha season.
Yeah, so kapha is comprised of earth and water. And when we go into kapha season, springtime, I actually think this is one of the most important seasons because when we leave winter, we've had a season of heavy grounding food. Winter should concentrate on the taste of sweet, sour, and salty to keep us balanced. And it's natural to gain a few pounds in winter. So as we go into spring, which is really wet and heavy and stagnant and slimy, and that's one of the Ayurvedic terms for it, slimy. It's a good one. It's unctuous. It's like growth. It's like you're preparing the ground for growth. We have all of this stuff in us from winter that we need to get rid of. So if we go into springtime and we haven't significantly changed our practices, we're going to feel like crap. We're going to even gain more weight. We're going to have sinus problems, allergies, congestion, perhaps bronchitis, flu, all sorts of things from all that heaviness and wet dampness that we didn't get rid of yet. So as we transfer from winter to spring, we have to really look at, oh my God, the beautiful, abundant greens that are available. And most people can go in their backyard and forage for like dandelion greens, and there's like wild clovers and so on that are all primarily bitter in taste. And of course, you can shop for these too, like kale and arugula and cilantro and parsley and the different fruits and vegetables, of course, asparagus, ramps, things that are available in the springtime. They're all designed to cleanse the body of the heaviness of winter. It's like nature's way of saying, here is like comet to scrub out the inside of your body in the
Mm-hmm.
form of cilantro, or something like that. And it's actually the only time of year I recommend juicing for my clients is spring and maybe early summer. But we can get in a lot of these really cleansing greens in the springtime in a juice where it impacts the bloodstream immediately and helps to cleanse. Also, there are vegetables like beets are a great blood cleanser. A lot of food does what it looks like it does. So beet
Mm.
cleans blood. So we just really need to concentrate on those lighter, drier, warming foods as we go into springtime to mitigate everything that we took on during the winter. And then with that natural progression, you can avoid the buildup of fluids in the system and avoid getting allergies and flus and so on.
Yeah, so we originally started talking about this because of the seasonal transitions and how we really do have to do different things in different seasons. And you could think about that literally for the seasons that we just talked about. You could also probably, use that also for seasons of life and seasons of epochs of time, or, we're in a pandemic now. That's sort of a season, right? So
Yeah,
it's like learning how to live for the time that you're in. And it's interesting that it's really difficult for a lot of people. And you do have to learn a different way of living. Like Susan said, you can't just go into the store and eat the things that are available to you, because those things that are available to you, that they may not be appropriate for what your body needs at that moment. So it's
right.
so important to learn this stuff. Susan, you have had such an interesting career path. You owned a bookstore and then you became an author.
Right.
It's like you
Yeah.
were a person who sold books and I kind of have a similar story where I used to work as head of product development for a health insurance company and then I became a healthcare provider.
Mhm.
So sort of similar, but sounds like we both had sort of midlife crises and turned to
Yes.
Ayurveda after that.
Yeah.
Mine was about 10 years earlier than yours, I think.
Mm.
Now, I wanted to talk with you about this because I think you were Oprah's intern when you were younger as well. And I just got an intern, and she's so sweet and she's in college. So, that idea of you being an intern was really something I wanted to talk with you about. What was that like? How did that happen? And how long did you do that? Were you Oprah's intern?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because both Oprah and I had issues with weight. And I used to work in a health food store. This was 1979, 1980, way before a lot of your listeners were born, I'm sure. I was a senior in high school, and Oprah was a newscaster here in Baltimore at the time. And she lived in the complex where the health food store was where I worked. And she used to come in there every day. She used to jog around the area and would come in and sit down at the juice bar where I made food. And she would order what we thought were healthy foods, right? Because we're in a health food store juice bar. So she would eat a bunch of carob covered almonds while waiting for the food, have a carrot juice, and then eat like an avocado tuna melt or something like that. Like, we didn't know, like, that was all so heavy and sugary and sweet and calorie laden. Like, we had no idea. We just thought health food store must be good for us. I have to say, I used to take my breaks and sit outside and smoke a cigarette back then too. I mean, it's crazy. But so Oprah and I and the other girls who worked in the juice bar, we would talk about our weight and guys and all sorts of stuff. But none of us ever lost any weight. But during that time, I became close to Oprah and told her I wanted to be a writer and a journalist. And she said, I need an intern at the TV station and let's make that work. So I made it work with my high school and I became her intern and at the news station, the other anchors and so on. And it was a really pivotal time in my life. I was 18 years old. And so a lot of things were changing. I was getting ready to go to college. But Oprah was a huge influence because she was so dynamic. I, at the time, probably weighed like 180 pounds. I was 5'7". So I probably should have weighed probably closer to 150, would have been probably much better for me at that time. But so I was a little bit heavier, and Oprah was significantly heavier. I'm sorry to say that, but she was. But I think that was part of her persona thing. But just watching her struggles actually and her struggles with men and weight, it really taught me a lot at the time and how she tried to handle things. It gave me some lessons on what to do and what not to do. And she was very open and caring. As I now know, she's very kapha dosha, extremely caring about other people and wanting to accommodate. But now I think she's obviously more pitta, a lot more fire. She made so much happen in her life, and she's such a force. She's an amazing person.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wish actually I knew more about the doshas then because I would have had a better understanding also of what to eat, but an understanding of relationships and so on. But yeah, my little Oprah moment is really beautiful. It was almost a year of hanging out with her, and I learned a lot. She was incredible.
Yeah, and I also, I think she's an example of a person that we really have seen her go through so many changes, because she's been in the public for so long of her life that, if you looked at pictures of me when I was in college, I had the freshman 15 or something. And, I think many of us have gone through changes and ebbs and flows of our lives, but we don't have the whole world looking at us as we're going through them. And
Right.
so, it's just obviously she's turned her life into such an amazing thing and has helped so many different people. So I'm glad you shared that experience. And
And I will say she's still heavy, but that's because she's Kaphic. And, she lost a bunch of weight once and she kept it off for like 5 minutes because that's not who she is. And like, I'm still heavy, like I'm no skinny mini, but thankfully my highest weight was 237. And, I lost a significant amount, but I'm Kaphic. So I'll never be like a 130-pound person. I don't think I ever was. But you have to know who you are. So I think Oprah's more
hmm
comfortable in her skin. I'm very comfortable in my skin. It's just when you understand your dosha, you can't like fight against it. You have to flow. You just have to flow with it. You can't like push and fight against everything in life. You just want to be the healthiest Vata Pitta or Kapha that you can be. And I want
yeah.
to be the healthiest Kapha Pitta person that I can be. I get distracted by my Vata sometimes, but I know who I am and I can't strive to be something I'm not, or I'll get way out of balance. So we just have to really love ourselves the way we are and try to stay balanced within those parameters, is what I
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like we could talk so much. It's
think.
already been almost 50
I
minutes. And
know.
so Ayurveda is so personalized. And because we focus on the doshas and the individual's unique situation, and, I always like to tell the story of how I used to wash my hair every day because all my friends had oily hair. I thought I did too, but apparently didn't. So I didn't need to wash my hair every day, but my oily friends did because they were pitta. So basically, learning about ourselves at the individual level is so important. And it's hard to give one recommendation to people that helps everyone, isn't it? Because
Yes.
we're so different. But because Ayurveda is kind of like a thing, right? It's a system. There are certain practices that a lot of people could try them. Could you give us an example of one of those practices that are generally beneficial and safe for people to try, regardless of their type?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing we want to do in the morning when we get up is to hydrate. And that's to hydrate your tissues through drinking warm temperature or warm water, lemon for vata and kapha, and lime for pitta, but also to hydrate the body through movement. So, first thing when you get up in the morning, just some simple stretches, moving your fingers, your wrists, your ankles, your knees, doing some subtle twists for your spine. It gets the organs, it flushes out some toxins of the organs. So, everybody can benefit drinking, 10, 12 ounces of water and doing some simple movements to get the synovial fluid moving in the body is really important. Also, really important for every dosha is to give yourself time in the morning for a good bowel movement. People often, when they used to work outside the home, sort of rush out and not have a good bowel movement. But the good urination and bowel movement in Ayurveda is the first way we want to get rid of the accumulated waste that was separated from the nutrients overnight. So make sure to sit and take your time and breathe and have a good bowel movement every day is really important. If you don't, there's some Ayurvedic remedies that you can look up or you can email me. Another thing I think that everybody can really benefit from is to eat 3 meals a day, 2 meals for kapha, if they can take it, they usually can. Don't snack in between your meals and have a light dinner. This seems to serve every dosha. And if you're really not hungry in the morning or a little bit heavier, maybe just try to have your fruit in the morning. Have your largest meal sometime between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. It's pitta time of day. And don't snack in between. Eat a significant meal so that you don't feel hungry. Let your body do all the metabolizing it needs to do between meals, that little intermittent fast. Have a light meal in the evening. Try to eat before 7 or at least 3 hours before bed, and then don't eat again until the morning. And this is how you really have a system that moves well. I tell my clients that I'm working with, even before I talk to them about the specific food, try the 2 to 3 meals a day, no snacking, and let's see how we go from there. I don't care what
Yeah.
food is in there to begin with, we can work on that later. But we just eat all day long in our society. And so we really need to look at that and give the body a break. And that's something that every dosha can do.
I really want to reiterate that because I see the same thing, and I see that most people are eating 3 meals a day and two snacks, and that
Hmm.
is way too much food for
Yeah.
most people. So I just want to reiterate that if that's your pattern, if you're listening to this and that's your pattern, you really need to look at it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
email us and we'll give you ways to work with that.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. Susan, people are going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to learn more about your work. They're going to want to learn about your book. So tell them how they can learn more about you and where to find you in your book.
Great. So my new book will be available at the end of the year, and new year, new you kind of thing. And my current book, Ayurveda Beginner's Guide, is available at every place books are sold, online at indie booksellers, bookshop.org, as well, of course, Amazon. But try to go to your independent bookstore first, please. And new book you can get from the Simon and Schuster website, at your local bookstore, everywhere else it'll be available. My website is Breathe Ayurveda. So that's BreatheAyurveda.com. VEDA, breatheayurveda.com. And it lists all now I'm doing Zoom consultations and so on, lists lots of resources. And you can email me at susan@breatheayurveda.com. I'm happy to send you food guidelines, food combination worksheets, and things like that. Anything to help you along your path. I'm happy to help you with anything. And if you Google my name, you'll find lots of different videos and podcasts, in addition to Heather's fabulous podcast, to learn more.
And we will make sure to include Susan's contact information every way you want to find her in the show notes. And Susan, just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And I really look forward to seeing your latest book come out and seeing the effects that that has on people. So thank you so much for being here.
And thank you, Heather. And thank you for everything that you are doing for Ayurveda and fertility and women. It's invaluable. So it's like, rah, rah, go Ayurveda.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Follow me on social media and see if you'd like to go deeper. You can find me on Instagram at Heather Grish. That's at Heather, GRZYCH. If you're ready to go deeper, then stop by my website if you want to explore booking a consultation. And meet me here next time on the Wisdom of the Body podcast.